So the purpose of this conversation and future conversations on this channel is education, understanding, and growth. I have no intention of hostility and wish for all parties involved or discussed to live happy, fruitful lives. To outline my background, I'm an anarcho-capitalist. I support the teachings of David D. Friedman, Russell Brand, and Michael Malice. My guest today is Kyle Tucker. Would you like to say a brief outline of your beliefs and current political activities?
Yeah, sure. I've really tried to think of a way to say this. I don't know of a term like anarcho-capitalist. I don't know of a term
Mhm.
like that. But I definitely believe like that the state is a good thing, and so I also lean a bit authoritarian, but I still believe in individual rights. So there's some kind of mix, but I don't know of a term for that.
Mhm.
Um, in terms of like the way I live, though, I see myself more as like kind of I try to be like Socrates. So, like imagine an old man who's jobless and annoys people in the marketplace with questions about what is justice and what is education, as opposed to like practical things like how much does that vegetable cost and stuff like that. That's kind of where I am. I don't know. So political activities, like, it's weird, because I say I lean authoritarian, but when it comes to the way I live, I really focus on what I can do as an individual. So I think more of like the people I interact with. If there's a chance for me to talk about something political in nature, I like to try to take the opportunity, and not just to like indoctrinate or something like that, but like to like what this channel is for is to like have a healthy conversation, and hopefully learn from each other. So I don't know. That's
Yeah,
how I
for
would say
sure.
that.
So obviously, I know, but for the people at home, what was your major in college?
Political science. Um, the what was it? The emphasis was in political theory, which again, I really like the theory side of things. So
Yeah.
especially the philosophy stuff. So,
So, first question, um, are all humans intelligent?
I mean, my gut says yeah, but I keep wondering what exactly intelligence is. Again, the whole Socrates
Mhm.
thing. Um, my I kind of am interested to know if you think this is a good way of looking at it, but I think of it as like problem solving. So
Mhm.
if you so like everyone has a different level probably of like how well they can solve problems, and also you can solve a problem in a bunch of different ways, and some of them might be more harmful to you and others might be more helpful to you, stuff like that. But all of that I think requires a level of intelligence, um, whether it's communication or solving a math problem, um, or like figuring out the best way to hunt a deer or something like that. Like
Yeah.
every person is able to, even if it's just a niche thing, like every person has something that they just are good at and they just know how to solve problems, and it's like second nature to them. Like a lot of us can drive, right? Like we just know how to drive, but there was a time when we couldn't do that, but we all learned like that skill. I don't know. So I think most people, if not everyone, I mean, I imagine maybe, I mean, even someone in a coma, like before they were in the coma,
Mhm.
like they were intelligent and they still have brain activity, but maybe I don't know what's going on. Maybe they're having a dream where they're solving problems. I don't know.
Yeah.
So even in that case, maybe, yeah, I don't know.
No, I hear somebody, I forget, I can't cite my source here, but somebody said this a while ago, and it always stuck with me that every single person you see is an expert in something,
Mhm.
and every person you can see can teach you something. It might be stupid. It might be like this is like an absolute expert in stacking bananas.
Right.
It's like,
Yeah.
it's dumb, but hey, they're much better at it than you. You know what I mean?
I mean, yeah, there are world records for all kinds of stuff. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, that's just the extreme, right? But like,
Mhm.
you don't even have to necessarily be. I don't even know if I would say everyone's an expert at something, but like, because again, what is an expert? But like, everyone
Mhm.
definitely has things that they are like more skilled at than other things, and you can find someone that like that. In my case, like there's something that I'm better at than someone else,
Mhm.
and vice versa. They're better at something I'm not as good at. So yeah, I think I agree with that mostly. Um, I don't know. In my head, expert means something very specific. Is the
Oh,
only reason
sure.
I say that. But
Yeah,
if
it
you
can
ask me to
be.
define that, I can't really do that. So maybe I don't disagree with you at all.
So PC culture and equality are discussed a lot in traditional media at the moment, whether positively or negatively. Do you feel that these topics are important to discuss?
Uh, I mean, yeah, I think they are. I think what's most important is, I mean, you could, I think this is probably true about any subject, but the way that they're talked about, and I don't mean like, how do I say it? Because so like, for instance, PC culture, a lot of that is some kind of belief about the way we say things or the way we do things.
Mhm.
Um, I don't mean that. I mean like deeper than that. Like there has to be a space somewhere where we can talk about whether a specific rule in PC culture or a specific rule when it comes to equality is even the correct rule. Like there has to be a place for that conversation to happen somewhere.
Mhm.
Um, and what I see happening regularly when it comes to issues of equality and PC culture is that there are at least a lot of people that want to shut down a conversation. Um, so it makes it difficult. Like even if someone asks a question in a very like in a very heartfelt, just genuine curiosity kind of way, they get shut down because someone makes an assumption about them, like, oh, you're just, I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for, like a bigot or something like that. Like there's a lot of ways to shut someone down, and so I think they're important. Like more than that, like there's other things why they're important, but just I think the most important part of that element, that subject, is the actual having an actual conversation about, what's good about being PC, what is PC, what's bad
Mhm.
about PC stuff, when does it cross the line. Uh, but if you shut down the conversation before you can get there, then there's a lot of there's just a lot of room for harmful things to happen. A lot of people to get hurt in the process because
Yeah,
no one's actually considering the consequences of what they're saying.
precisely. I think it's PC culture specifically is important for the sake of kindness and politeness. And there's a lot of people that are against it purely because they want to continue to have their own prejudice, bigoted ways.
Yeah, I see
Not
that.
not that that's everybody that's anti-PC culture, because there's also an element of it where it is used just as an attack. You don't actually like research this person. You're just like, oh, I disagree with you. You're a racist, which is dumb. It's not helpful. It's not productive. It's not actually helping us find the people who are racist. Not that we should like hang them or anything, but not that we're hunting them down.
Just
But
getting extreme over here.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I think so. It's important for kindness. I think it's weaponized sometimes, and it shouldn't be.
Yeah, no, yeah, I think that's a really good way of, yeah. I say things in a really long-winded way. That was a much like more concise way of saying that. Yeah, using it as a weapon rather than like a tool for like good social change.
For sure.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So, how do we achieve social equality beyond legal equality with the right to vote and right to marry, et cetera?
It's always cooler to go with one thing, right? But I can see several ways. I can see places where it could take place. There is like I think part of it is what the state does. As I see it, law, no matter what, the law is not neutral. There's kind of a conversation out there that happens a lot, where people like to say, well, law should be neutral when it comes to morality. Like law is inherently moral. It's inherently teaching society what morality is, even if it may not be this generation when the law is passed, but the next generation that grows up under that law sees it as normal. And they see it as like a right thing to do. And that doesn't mean that there won't be people who grow up and think a law is wrong or unjust. Like that happens. We've seen that happen. Like
Mhm.
look look at Jim Crow and like other things that like were legally injustice was just being enforced, and then people grew up, saw how horrible it was, and tried to change it. The law is important. Over time it can actually affect people, but it doesn't, oftentimes it won't do anything for people now. So like people who are currently alive that have their prejudices, that have uh, just whatever they've grown up believing. And again, like part of me is like, I don't know if that's really going to change very much. Like I definitely see people like change a little bit over time at least. And I think what usually does that more than a law changing is usually more like especially religious organizations, but also like interpersonal relationships. So like your parents or your friends, your siblings, extended family, just people you work with, like conversations you have with them. Um, I think those things, at least in my, again, this is really my personal experience. It's not like I did some kind of scientific research on this to see how many people were affected one way versus another. But um, at least personally, personal conversations with one other person or in like a smaller group have usually been the ways in which, when it comes to equality, prejudice has been revealed in my own life, like that I wasn't aware of. And then at that point, I'm like forced to think about it. And like,
Mhm.
I can either choose to ignore, right, or I can choose to like try to work towards something. And so, but usually it's never been because a law passed, or
Mhm.
it's usually because like when I go to church, like my pastor says something, or like my brothers and sisters of Christ say something, or it's because like a coworker said something, or like a family member said something to me. And it also only happens in like a like a more civil conversation too, like a
Yeah.
heart to heart. It doesn't happen in a quarrel. Like if you quarrel, all that goes out the window.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
As soon as aggression gets involved, people get defensive and nobody learns anything.
A lot of these things can be undermined by just the wrong approach to having a conversation, which like we all know how to talk to each other, but having a vulnerable, respectful conversation is really difficult for anyone. For me,
Mhm.
probably for you. I don't want to make that assumption that it's that way for you, but I assume it's that way for you because I say everybody. So
Yeah.
like we all it's hard for us, but we at least find a few people that we learn how to do it with. But when it comes to other people, maybe we just give up and we just go into quarrel mode. I don't know, like I
Yeah.
imagine you and your wife like have learned how to have vulnerable conversations with each other. But I doubt that you're that way with everybody, right?
Yeah. Correct.
Same with me. Like I have like Hallie and I have learned how to be vulnerable, but other people I can be quick to judge and like quick to harshness towards them when I shouldn't. And
Mhm.
vice versa. They do it to me and then I know what it feels like when they do it to me, yet I do it to them, and I should know like I shouldn't do that. Like I hate it when I'm attacked. Why am I attacking this person? You know?
Yeah, and I can think of the biggest moments of personal growth and all that stuff for me has been when I've been in close proximity with people that are not normally in my circle, that are of sexualities that are not normally in my circle, that are races that are not normally in my circle. Just when you experience, being around these people and understanding, oh wow, something I thought was wrong or something I've been saying, that's extremely insensitive. I shouldn't be doing that. For me, it has definitely all been about the personal experiences.
Just having a face to face encounter with someone who's different than you
Mhm.
just has such a huge impact. And again, it comes down to how you approach it. Because when that difference meets you, you can choose to meet it with aggression, or you can choose to meet it with at least just curiosity. And I try to meet things with curiosity because I think it's better in the long run.
Yeah, and some people are inherently defensive and aggressive, um, and that's their choice, that's their fight. You can't fight it for them. But
Mhm.
um, I wish for more people to approach everything with an open mind. So, and this is a little bit of a vague, tough question, but
Okay.
as a political science major, what do you feel is the best form of government for individual freedoms, whether that be like, like democracy or republic,
Yeah, that's so interesting because this is very theoretical, which is, as I said earlier, that's more my wheelhouse anyway. So people can do you know bring me physical evidence something, and I'll be like, oh, cool, I didn't know that. But in my head, when you imagine anarchy, right? There's no
Mhm.
state. Um, Again, I always get a little confused about where the line is between anarchy and just like kind of private organization, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Because even I imagine within an anarchical society, there are still groups that have collective interests, but they're not like definitionally like a state, I guess. Um, and of course, there's plenty of groups out there that are like a church, for instance. You join a church, you're not forced into a church based on where you live, and like that's kind of like what a state is, right? Like, right?
Mhm.
But individual rights conflict, and that happens whether there's anarchy or whether there is a state. Like we see it even in our country, like when you think about the issue of abortion, like that issue is between the conflict of a right to choose and a right to life. And
Mhm.
there's all kinds of reasons as to why you might be on either side. But um, the point of the matter is that someone's individual freedom is not going to happen. Someone's going to win in a given case when there's a conflict. So on the one hand, I'm thinking, are there certain rights that conflict with others more, that maybe there's a form of government that keeps that right to a minimum, but it lets the others just have free reign so that there's less
Mhm.
conflicts, because I'm trying to think, because the best form of government would find a way to minimize the amounts of individual rights conflicts, not just let
Mhm.
everyone do what they want. Because anarchy, everyone can do what they want, but there's still like, unless there's other kinds of groups out there that are keeping conflicts from happening, or at least enforcing some kind of retribution for whenever someone infringes another's right or whatever. I don't know how to say that the best way.
Mhm.
Um, to actually answer the question, though, I would think a government that has. I just don't know if there's a right answer in terms of the. I would think republic would be the best, but it can't just be a republic. It has to be one that is designed with lots of gridlock.
Mhm.
So kind of like the U.S. in some ways.
Yeah, no, I think the how the American government was at least originally designed. Obviously, people have put their stamp on it and changed things, but how the American government was originally designed, with the three different branches of government and not one of them having necessarily too much power over the other, it creates conflict within that government and can create a standstill for a lot of things, which we see all the time. With you can have a Democratic president, but you can have a Republican Congress.
Right.
So it's like nobody wins there.
And the
And
Supreme Court might have a different idea too.
and then like in another 8 years, it can be flopped. And
Yeah.
it's a really great system for not getting a lot done.
I mean, I agree. Yeah, and I definitely think that the founders, at least a lot of them that were involved in the writing of the Constitution and the amendments, really had that in mind. Is like, I mean, because prior to, like, they fought a revolution largely based on the idea that they needed, well, representation, but also that they didn't want the government intruding on spheres of their life that it shouldn't intrude on. And so creating a system, so it made sense to create a system that was not really at all like, the empire, but more like a system that wouldn't really be able to do much damage. So I think James Madison mentions it in one of the Federalist Papers.
Yeah.
In one of the Federalist Papers, he talks about like pitting the individual interest or the self-interest of different bodies of government against each other in order to make sure that none of them do harm to the people, which is who they're supposed to be there for anyway.
Right.
I thought that was really a really clever way of designing the government. I don't know if I agree with that form of government, by the way. I just do think that it is the most, I think it's the best form in terms of supporting individual rights or
Mhm.
individual freedoms. I don't know if I should say freedoms and rights. I don't think those are really the same thing,
Yeah,
but kind of are. Yeah.
they're a little different. Yeah.
Yeah.
The next question is kind of basically we covered it. Well, maybe we didn't. Is individual freedom more important than the good of the people as a whole?
I mean, I don't think so. I think it's I mean, I see it like a vital, right? So your brain and your heart, they're not more important. You need both in order for the body to function properly.
Mm.
I think individual freedom as well as the good of the whole, I think both of those things you have to have. Like, obviously, like practically speaking, there are times where you have to pick. Like, so either you pick good of the whole or you don't, and you pick individual freedoms. And really, I guess you could see really, especially with government, you could see really any situation as a kind of a, are we, at least where a law that we're about to pass, should we pass one that leans the whole or individuals?
Mhm.
Or I guess in some cases, not passing the law would be leaning towards individuals and vice
Mhm.
versa. But yeah, I know that's kind of a wishy-washy answer, but I really don't think like I said, I leaned authoritarian, right? But that's different from totalitarian, which is like controlling everything about everyone. That that's no good. I mean, and the example I use, and actually John Locke, modern philosopher, very influential in like the founder's way of thinking, talks about how there are similarities between family and government. So like think of how parents raise their kids. We see what happens when parents are helicopters, right? When they
Mhm.
hover over everything their kid does, they provide endless regulations for everything that they're supposed to do. The kid, I mean, we know the kid's going to rebel or they're going to crush under the pressure because
Mhm.
either way, it's not good.
Mhm.
But a healthy parents like or healthy parenting looks like a mix of them, right? Like you have rules, you have some guidelines, whatever you want to call them, but you also have to let the kids like have experiences and they have to also experience failure. That's part of it. And the only
Mhm.
way they have that is if you let them make choices. And you can pick the areas of their life where they make the choices, but you still have to let them do it or else they won't learn on their own. And again, it's different, right? Because eventually you stop being a kid. It's like imagine the analogy falls apart because it would be like a state raising its citizens to become their own states. That's not
Mhm.
what happens, but um,
Well,
really,
and leaning on what you were saying earlier, that almost makes me think is like the best thing to do is create a state that guides people in a direction for a certain amount of time. And then once the people as a whole are in a, in a good place and they're decent, kind people, is it best to let the state just like let the people go? I don't know.
yeah. I mean, that's definitely an interesting thought. I mean, I think a lot of people they wouldn't go maybe that far, but they do. You do see it a lot when it comes to education, right? Like, there's a lot of people who just really want to focus on education. Like, if we could just instill good values into kids in some way, some systematic way,
Mhm.
and then after that, like not be worried as much. Like that's kind of the similar thing, right? Is like the state is raising up decent citizens, and then after that, like if they're a decent citizen, like more hands-off approach, which would be more similar to parenting.
Yeah, maybe some
Yeah,
form of government that doesn't apply after you're 18.
right. But yeah, the again, I think I have I mean, I think the worst of people, so I don't really think that would ever. Like, I love Star Trek. Don't get me wrong. Star
Mhm.
Trek, like the operates on the premise that centuries in the future, humanity has evolved not just in like a natural, like not just in a natural way, but in like a almost a spiritual way. Like like we have internal conflicts, but we're somehow just better at handling them. Like kind of like Vulcans are like superior I know this is
Yeah.
a weird conversation to have. But, like, Vulcans are superior
No,
in
I
the way
think
they
about it all the
control
time.
their emotions and stuff.
Yeah.
So I don't see that as a possibility. So I don't see that form of government ever working. But yeah, but like if a government could help like further the evolution of humans in a way like that, then eventually, yeah, it could be more hands off.
No, I think about Star Trek a lot politically,
Yeah, it has a lot
because
to say.
it really does. And for those of you who don't know, in Star Trek, it's based on the human civilization, but they're placed several hundred years in the future. Um, Planet Earth is under one world government. There's no longer any like country lines. There's no longer any hunger. There's no longer any poor people, and they've eliminated currency entirely. They've evolved, I guess, out of greed. It's just a society, all as one. Based in kindness and the pursuit of your own, personal wishes, which is an awesome fantasy. But I don't know that human nature has the ability to evolve like that.
Yeah, I'm very skeptical of that notion.
Yeah.
So, and because of that skepticism, it definitely affects the way that, I mean, both of us would view a state, or really any kind of organized.
Yeah. No, state or no state, people suck, and that's
Yeah,
just how it's going to be.
right.
Is what it is. It's part of living on planet Earth here. So with any governing body, there can become a divide between the aristocracy and the common man. Is that divide important, and is it preventable?
Again, I say I lean authoritarian. In this case, yeah, I think it's important. So, I think a divide, again, is it this or is it this? It's definitely not this.
Yeah.
Okay, but it is like there's going to have to be some kind of divide, at least between the ones who are ruling and the ones who are ruled. Let's take our government, for instance. So there's kind of a gap to some extent between, let's just take the legislature, so representatives and the voter. Um, Again, the voter, like, theoretically, the representative is uh, accountable to the voter, and the voter can, vote differently if they don't like what the representative is doing. So there's a connection there, right? Like, they're not this, but they're not this because, I mean, this would literally be democracy. Is the voter is the representative, they
Mhm.
vote on everything. So there's a divide. So there's leeway for the representative to do things that the voter doesn't get to do, and to be privy to information that the voter doesn't necessarily get to access. Um, and I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's just, when you take a job, you have to be able to do that job well, and to do that job well, you have to have enough time to do the job, which is
Mhm.
why you're employed to be a representative. You're not bivocational. Um, and you have to like have access to information that's relevant to governing a body of people, not just your own life. And and a lot of that would be information that the average individual wouldn't necessarily be able to access. Although with the internet, there's more access and stuff like that. But there's got to be some kind of divide, and there's even a divide in our system. Again, I think a divide crosses a line. So I'm not pro theocracy or anything. Like, Christianity really heavily impacts like what I think politically.
Mhm.
Um, I don't necessarily like the First Amendment, right? Says don't establish a religion for the government, basically. I don't necessarily have a problem with there being religious influence in government, honestly. But what I have a problem with, which has happened plenty of times historically, is when the aristocracy aren't just seen as people who have a different job than you, but as people who are literally like the voice of God. Um,
Right.
like that, because that's like, that's not just this. That's like like they're like a different dimension now. Like they're
No, that's like, I know that's how it was. and possibly still is in China with their dictatorship. The leaders literally claimed to be like like basically a deity and be the voice of God. Yeah, which is so corrupted and not okay.
Yeah. So like I this is a nuance, I think, but I do think that government is like an institution that God favors and like God wants to be there, which is one of the reasons like I'm not anarchist. But
Yeah.
like generally when people see things that way, they easily conflate that, oh, because they have authority vested like from God, or I don't know if vested is the right word, but like
Yeah.
granted from God, therefore whatever they do is God's will. But that's not logically necessary. Just because they have authority from God does not mean that what they do is God's will. What it does mean is that they are going to answer for what they do in a way that a citizen would not have to answer. So imagine a judgment day. Governing officials will have to answer for a lot more and will have a lot more, I think, weight on their shoulders because they have been given authority, and people who have authority just have a heavier burden. I don't think that when a government official does something, that means it's God's will and like that's what God wants. I think
Mhm.
it's just that they are going to have to answer for that in a way that I would not have to answer for me having a bad diet or something. Like
Yeah.
that's a silly example, but there's just a different weight of responsibility. In the same way that a teacher's going to have to answer for the way they teach children, and
Mhm.
raise the next generation in a way that, and also in a way that a parent would have to. Whereas someone who grows up never really teaching a generation or never raising a parent has a different level of responsibility, I guess, that I mean, you could probably find somewhere in their life where they're influential,
Yeah.
but I see people as having to answer for those things. It's not necessary. I don't think that means therefore they're doing what God wants them to do. I just think
Yeah. Yeah.
they're gonna have to answer for it.
No, I think of what I used to do for work, working for a major telecommunications company. I was both just retail sales and sales management in that job. And if the store was doing poorly, it came down on the management. It doesn't come down on the individuals.
Yeah.
Um, so it's like if a store consistently does poorly, it's the manager's job. It's on the line. It's not the salesperson. That's what makes me think of that and relate to that.
And then I thought of another interesting way to maybe look at that divide thing, right? Between like
Yeah.
the elites versus like the common or whatever you want to call it. I don't want to make it seem like one's cool and the other's like trash. But it's like the just having a separation. Just think of like a president, right? Whenever a president, I mean, Donald Trump was like a really really polarizing, right? But like
Mhm.
um really any president has like done things that like people have gotten upset about, right? But if they had just been like not the president, just like, someone in your community, like you might judge them a little for it, but you wouldn't like get so upset. Like you would just be like, oh, people, they do things
Yeah.
like. And so when it comes to like the president, you do have groups that are like, well, the president's a human too. They just, people do things, and other people who like kind of want to see, they have like a very high elevated, like the president has to be like the epitome of humanity, something like that. There's like those two different groups. And I don't think the extremes are good. I think that someone in power should hold themselves to a higher standard, but I still do think there's like room for realizing that they have humanity, that before they were president, they were born here, or I guess they had to be born here to be president, right? I think that's
Oh
how
yeah.
the rules work. But other positions though, they weren't even necessarily born here. They grew up here or whatever, and were just had a job and maybe had a family. Like Like they're just, in a lot of ways, they're just like you, although they might have made more money than you. That's usually the case, but
With politicians, yeah.
with politicians, yeah, because turns out money is super important when it comes to elections.
It was just a small loan of $1
Just a
million.
small.
The visual arts, whether it be films, television, or otherwise, are prone to political and social scrutiny. There's a belief that politics should not play a part in these things or influence their outcome. What do you think the role of politics should play in visual arts?
I'll start with, I think art. I don't think it crosses a line, but I think there's a point where it just becomes not helpful. And this kind of connects to the PC thing. I think it's good for art to talk about politics. I think it's good for art to be used to discuss anything. Some art does it better than others. And some art doesn't really feel like it's designed to talk about it. Like I've seen sitcoms talk about politics in a very well done way, but usually when they do it, they don't actually have a political message. Like I think of shows like maybe Seinfeld or Always Sunny in Philadelphia,
Mhm.
where like there's a political issue at the heart of the episode, but the characters are just horrible people, and they're just like, it doesn't matter. Like the political issue doesn't actually matter. What matters is I'm laughing at how terrible these people are.
Yeah.
Um, and sometimes you see when sitcoms try to do something, they try to make a really serious like message in an episode.
Mhm.
And oftentimes it just doesn't feel right. Like it doesn't work with, like, this is not the genre anymore. So sometimes I think it just works against the art form itself. But also, even in places where there's movies that are just literally the genre is political in nature, like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington or something like that. Like there are movies where the theme is political in nature, but they don't really wrestle with the issue in a very thoughtful way. They just kind of give you propaganda,
Yeah.
which is kind of what we mentioned it a little bit with PC, where there's a point where you're not just trying to be nice, you're just trying to like aggressively get people to submit to your rules. And
Right.
it goes for the people that are against PC as well, but it happens in art too. Is there's art that just tries to indoctrinate you with the thought, and the reason I say it's indoctrination is because it just tells you it's true and doesn't provide any reasons, and makes you feel dirty if you don't agree. uh,
Mhm.
Kind of guilts you into it, or kind of some kind of like psychological coercion
Yeah.
is taking place. And that, I don't think, like, I don't know if I'm against art. I'm against art doing it. I don't think if I think it should be illegal, because that's like kind of anti-free speech and stuff.
Yeah.
But there is harm in it.
Yeah. No, I think of stuff like on The Office,
Hmm.
when Michael Scott finds out that Oscar is gay. He he goes about it the very wrong way, very insulting way,
Right.
for the obviously for comedic sake. But how it's treated is not. It doesn't feel unnatural. It's like it's part. It feels like part of the character. It makes sense that he would say this like these like crazy offensive things. Um, and when Michael Scott finds out that, oh, wait a minute, I was saying these slurs, but he's actually gay. This is not okay for me to do. I feel really bad about this. Very well within the context of the show, it kind of paints a picture of how we should treat this kind of thing, where just with kindness and understanding,
Hmm.
for you know for the remainder of the show. But there's definitely a lot of times that it's been done very poorly. So, one of my favorite questions: what if taxes were optional? What would happen? Who would pay them?
Just to make sure I understand this right, so there would be a state,
Hmm.
which means it would need funds, I guess. But
Right.
taxes are optional. You won't. There's no IRS. There's no
Yeah. It's not a total.
retribution. There's no punishment for not paying. You pay or you don't pay.
Right. It's like a donation.
I don't think people would pay him. This is the weird thing. So I lean authoritarian, right? So I think you should like really respect authority. there's something inherently within people, I think, and I say this about myself, that doesn't really want to do that.
Yeah.
And so if it's optional, like, why am I going to do this? Why would I take more money out of my income? Like, people do take money out of their income, right? But it's like they donate to their church or they donate to the charity of their choice, whatever it might be. And but they do it of their own free will, and so it's something they usually like, whatever that organization is doing, like they really believe in it, right? Um, and so like I'm sure there might be maybe like 3 people that really believe in like the state, um, and would like pay money, right?
Mhm.
But the other thing to think about is there are probably more than 3 people that like believe in the state, but they also like, they think about their own situation. They're like, well, I could really use the money for this though, and I'm sure someone else will pay it.
Mhm.
Like that's also going to happen, and
Yep.
a lot of that's going to happen. And so, I mean, eventually, the state might like like let's say there's a president, right? The president shows up on the news, assuming that enough taxes were paid so that there was enough stuff to cover in the news. I don't know, and
Yeah.
like shows up on the news and is like, so we hear you guys. We hear you want a military. I just got to say, we can't fund that.
Yeah.
Something like that. Like eventually that would come out, right? And then maybe more people would start paying a little bit. But
And I
I
think
just, yeah,
ultimately it would make the government more accountable with what they use their money for. I think the government would nearly instantly become a much more humanitarian organization. It's like, okay, look, I will give you money if you're helping the homeless, if you are building my roads, if you are protecting my country. If that's the only thing you're doing with my money, I'll gladly do it. But when we look at the current US budget of like 4.7 trillion, it's like, okay, well, clearly roads don't cost that much. I don't think they cost that much. So a lot of money's going somewhere. They're using it for something. And if taxes became optional, I just think we'd see a lot more accountability from the state.
maybe. The thing is, so this is something where, again, I said earlier, I don't have all the numbers right. So if someone came to me and was like, well, here they are, I'd be like,
Yeah.
oh, that's cool. I didn't know that. I don't know the numbers for how many people like currently donate to a charity of their choice or
Yeah.
something like that. Um, but because of my cynical beliefs about humanity, I assume that, and it's not all cynical, right? Some of it is like they just don't care. But I think a lot of people just, they're more familiar with their own situation. And like,
Mhm.
obviously, there's people who are in poverty, right? Like, they would definitely not pay the tax in this hypothetical because they really just need that money for food or water, whatever it might be. There's a lot of people who aren't in poverty, but they just can think of things that would really be helpful for them or their family, or they think is good for, their own life. And they would rather spend the money on that than giving some of that as an optional tax to help fund the state. I think
Mhm.
I just so that and that's more of a positive thing, right? Like it's someone taking care of themselves or something that they think is good for themselves, but it means that they're not going to pay the tax. I think a significant portion enough of people would do that, even with the knowledge of the government's underfunded for things. I'm assuming that the government would still be like trying to pass laws that people wanted. So maybe
Yeah.
people would, so people, they'd still have data. They'd probably still be getting data on what people want, and they'd try to pass laws. But as for the enforcement, that's where the money comes in, right?
Mhm.
I don't think they would still be able to get enough, even after people have been made aware that not enough taxes are being given, um, as long as taxes are optional. And again, if that's the case, then I don't think the accountability thing is as credible. But again, it is a hypothetical. Maybe people would pay the tax more than I think. Like that's very possible. I just don't know.
Yeah, it's definitely possible. It would be the state publishing the sad puppy videos of like, please donate to my charity.
Please donate.
Which is just hilarious. But
Which they'd have to have money to pay for those ads.
oh yeah.
So if they did, I think they would just either get more people would get mad and not pay taxes because like, why are you paying money to give me ads? Or, I can see that
on
backfire.
iPhone with taxpayer money.
I mean, the accountability does work. I do believe it would work to an extent, because at least in that case, they would probably be like, all right, fine, we'll stop paying for ads.
Yeah.
Because people got mad at them for it, but
yeah, right.
because they were spending that money that whoever donated, they were spending that money. That's the other thing is if a lot of people don't donate, would they feel responsible? Like, would they really feel like they have a vested interest in what the state does, even if the state does waste money on ads with puppy dog ads? Like, would people who didn't pay tax anyway care that much? Because other people are the ones who got suckered into paying for that tax. Not suckered, but they made the mistake of paying the optional tax, and now that's how their money's being used. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's totally hypothetical, but it's a fun thought bubble.
It is. I was making fun of you for it being your favorite question earlier, but I think it actually is a fun question.
Yeah.
I have come to the dark side.
Okay. So, last question here. Casting a blue vote in a red state or vice versa, let alone a third party vote, can be discouraging or feel pointless. What is the point of voting in our current political climate, and why is it important?
Okay, I love this question. I just like talking to people about this.
Yeah.
Because I don't know. I feel like a lot of good, at least for someone's, I would say their soul, like a lot of good can come to someone's soul if they really consider like their voting motivations. And it's not just because I think voting is like an important thing, but because the thinking about your motivations for voting is actually just helpful for thinking about your motivations for like everything, even to like what sandwich you pick when you go to a restaurant or something. I have some important concepts to kind of define, I think, when talking about like why is voting important, especially if you're like a minority in the state you live in, party wise or whatever. There's two types of voters, I would say. There's strategic. I mean, there's other kinds, but motivation wise, there's strategic voters and there's intrinsic voters. And I say that like the primary motivation is one of the two. You could have one, the other could be like your secondary. So the difference, strategic is when your primary motivation for why you vote, who you vote for, is based on likelihoods and the outcome. Intrinsic is more of like just an internal belief, an internal feeling that's you feel like is being represented when you cast your vote. And it's not really concerned with outcomes or statistical probabilities, stuff like that. For instance, to kind of get a picture of the difference, when someone's libertarian and they vote for a libertarian candidate for president, if they tell someone that they voted for the libertarian candidate, a very common response to that is, you wasted your vote, right?
Mhm.
So in this case, the libertarian is the intrinsic voter, and the person who said you wasted your vote is thinking strategically. So libertarian probably cares about more that they voted for what they believed in. They're not an idiot. They probably know that that person's not going to win the presidential election. But that wasn't what mattered the most when they cast their vote. What mattered is what they believed in. And they really felt like that candidate personified the things that they wanted to see happen in the presidential office. Whereas the person who says you wasted your vote, they're only thinking about the chances of your vote going, like, actually mattering in terms of the outcome.
Mhm.
So, which is why anyone who says that is always either someone who votes for a Republican or a Democrat, because those two parties have the highest chance of a candidate winning any given office.
Mhm.
Again, we've seen independents and like other parties get certain offices, but generally speaking, that is the case. It's your chances are higher if you vote for blue or red.
Mhm.
Um, and that's true. Like mathematically, it's true. But I don't think that like you still have to like for some reason just believe that's the way you should vote. Like that doesn't justify voting that way. That's just like there's nothing. I don't think there's anything wrong with voting intrinsically. In fact, I would say to someone who strategically votes is statistically speaking, your vote doesn't matter. Like like your vote only matters in the case of a tie.
Mhm.
Let's take your district. You're voting out of thousands of people. What are the chances that your vote out of those thousands is going to break a tie? The answer is mathematically less than 1%. And now let's think about the time off work you maybe had to take, or the thing you had to give up on that evening, or that whatever whenever you would have voted. Like think about the
Mhm.
stuff you lose, and think about, was it worth it for that 0.001% chance of you affecting the outcome? In my head, it's not. Again, not why I would vote, but if I were voting for that reason, it wouldn't be worth it, so I wouldn't vote at all. I would rather just spend my time more efficiently elsewhere. And I think if that doesn't convince someone not to vote, I think deep down they actually might be more intrinsically voting, but they just like to say they give a strategic reason for something that's really like a more internal, intrinsic thing. So I think really more people than maybe would want to admit actually believe in the intrinsic voting. I can empathize with a Democrat voting in a red state and feeling disheartened. I can empathize with that, but I don't think that they're making a horrible choice because mathematically speaking their vote's wasted. Because some people, this is something that happens in Utah, by the way. People, like, it's a red state, right? People, there's people who vote, they're technically Democrat, like they would prefer to vote for Democrat, but instead they just vote in the Republican primaries for like the most liberal Republican that they can
Hmm.
find, um, because they're thinking strategically. Like they might actually think the Democratic candidate is a much better candidate, but they're not going to do it because they think their vote's wasted unless they
Yeah.
vote Republican and just try to vote for whichever Republican is the least conservative. I don't know, like that's kind of how people do it here sometimes.
That's interesting. I've never thought about that. If you feel like you have a hopeless case of your party winning, going to the team that you believe is guaranteed to win,
Yeah.
and finding the candidate within that party that you agree with the most.
Yeah. No. And like it's a viable strategy, but again, it's for that 0.0000001% chance of you affecting the outcome. So like, I think you should
Yeah.
find something more meaningful than that really small percentage. Like I think there's better reasons. Like I think it's better just to vote for someone because they're funny. Like I'd rather you vote for that reason than because there's a 0.00001% chance of you affecting the outcome if you vote for them.
So would you say that you're an intrinsic voter?
Yeah. So I'm about to out myself here. I don't really
Uh-huh.
vote, but that's a
Okay.
form of intrinsic voting, I would say. Um, because you could also say that not voting is also a wasted vote, right? Like strategically, that would
Mhm.
make sense, that argument. But if there's not someone that you see as worth voting for that's running, again, I think some people ask me, why don't I do write-ins? I think someone should choose to run if they're going to be in office. I know some people actually
Mm.
would think the other way on that, but so I wouldn't do a write-in. But if I don't see anyone running that like I really want to vote for, then intrinsically I think I want my voice to be heard. I think my voice is heard more if I don't vote than if I do. Um, and as a political science person, like I know that there are, like, one, I know that in terms of other countries that have elections, like real elections, not like fake ones, but
Yeah.
um, U.S. has extremely low voter turnout compared to places like Germany or the UK. That's because our voting laws are just, I think, not as good as they could be. But political scientists and politicians, like, they know that, and they're always trying to think of ways to increase voter turnout, because doing that would help them get an edge on other candidates if they found ways to get people to actually come to the polls that would otherwise not come to the polls.
Yeah.
And so I think not voting, like, there's plenty of reasons people don't do it, but intentionally not voting is a way of showing, I'm not going to go to the polls with these kinds of people running. You're going to have to do something different to get me to come to the poll. And again, I'm not thinking of it strategically because very few people are doing it for that reason, probably. I don't know, but it's not why I'm doing it. I'm doing it because it's something I believe in, not because of the chance of it affecting some kind of thing. But if you explain it that way, it might help a strategic voter understand why you might consider it. But really, it's just a deep down feeling, I think.
No, that makes perfect sense to me. Yeah, because if you don't agree with any party, I totally think that you're making a statement by not voting. I do think that there's a lot of people that aren't voting purely because they don't care, and
Yeah,
not all of them share your same sentiments. And so maybe within that, people who are not voting based on principle I would say, are within the minority of reasons for people not voting. Um, that that adds another dynamic to it. So it's a lot to think about. It's a lot to
yeah,
process.
yeah. I don't necessarily judge people that are indifferent to it. Because I think they wouldn't be if certain things happened. One of those things might be a lot of people probably just really, we talked about it already, but they feel like their voice isn't going to be heard. Like, there are people in Utah who are Democrat but vote Republican for, like, the most liberal Republican because they feel like
Mhm.
that's a way for their voice to be heard. But there are plenty of people who, they just, for an intrinsic reason, maybe they don't want to vote Republican at all, but they just don't really care to vote Democrat either because it's not going to matter. Like, like I know that there's at least some portion of the populace that just feels dejected and doesn't think it's worth voting, for intrinsic, really, or for strategic reasons. So they
Mhm.
just kind of, which there are ways to fix that. The primary issue is, like, so I guess what we call our current electoral system when it comes to,
Mhm.
like, really when it comes to Congress and when it comes to president. And actually, this kind of is the case, I think, for all states too. Like all 50 of them. Like, I don't really know how they elect all of the state legislators and stuff, but I think most of them follow this principle, and that is single member district plurality. So there's a bunch of districts, that's the plurality, and every district has a single member that's going to get that district. So single member district plurality. So what ends up happening, because most people are strategic voters, just how it turns out. I forget, there's the name of this law. I forget the name of the law. There's some kind of political science term. It's not really proven, but whenever it's happened, this is how things turn out. That whenever you have a single member district plurality system, it's always going to end up being a two-party system, because when you're running an election, you want to have an advantage over the other candidates, and you want to have the highest chance of success of getting elected. Only one person's going to win. The best way to guarantee that you're going to win is to get at least 51% of the uh, electorate to vote for you.
Mhm.
So what ends up happening is party organizations form, but the only ones that stick around are the ones that can get close to 50% of the vote, because they have a better shot at winning. And oftentimes what happens historically is smaller parties just pick one of the bigger ones and join into it and take all of their voters with them in order to increase the chances of someone getting into the office that they want. Again, we're very familiar with that system as Americans, but places like Germany does this, for instance. It's called proportional representation. So in this system, there are districts, just like we have here. So, but the difference is the districts have multiple members that win. So and and so basically what happens is, let's say that we have a one district, and that district has 10 members that are going to win the election. Basically what happens is, let's say that there's a party, there's three parties. One party gets 50% of the vote, and then one party gets 30%, and then another party gets 20%. That means that the party that gets 50% gets to pick 5 people from their party to represent that district. And that means that the party that gets 30% gets to pick 3 people to represent that district. And the party that got 20% gets to pick 2 people that won the district. So what ends up happening is, because as long as you get like a percentage high enough to get at least one seat, even a small party can still get some kind of voice in government. And so whenever you have a proportional representation system, there were more parties. There could be 5 parties. And that also means that, because when you have a 2-party system, right, you're trying to have a large enough umbrella to cover a large enough group of people. So you have parties that have tons of overlap. But when you have a proportional system, you have parties that are more distinct, and oftentimes you can find a party that you more so agree with in general. And also it doesn't feel like it's wishy-washy either. Because Republican and Democrat, like, we kind of maybe think we know what that means. But if you ask people all over the US what that means, it's going to sound like you're going to have a Democrat in one state that sounds like they're a Republican in this other state, because there's no real like distinction. And so I don't know. I just wanted to talk about it because proportional representation would be an interesting way of giving third parties a voice, so that people who are libertarian or green or justice, whatever, if they want to vote for Vermin Supreme, like, those people have more of a shot at actually getting representation if that's the system we had.
That's really interesting. I feel like that would be a major change to implement it in the States.
Well, yeah.
For sure.
Everyone in power would be like, no, because there would be no guarantee at all that they're gonna have a shot at staying, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's the biggest problem with changing electoral laws, is the people who are elected are changing them. And usually if they're changing them, it's to just further entrench their own current position, rather than trying to make the system more fair. Whatever fairness is, still.
It's possible that this has happened in history, but to my knowledge, I can't think of a time when there's ever been somebody in a position of power that said, I should have less power. Let's vote for that.
I mean, George Washington, right?
That's just with the exception of like maybe George Washington.
But again, they are exceptions. They're not.
Yes.
Like, you're talking about a rule? Yeah, absolutely. It's a rule.
Well, Kyle, thank you so much for being on here. I really appreciate it, man. Would you like to shout out any charities or organizations?
It's really unique to Utah, though. It's called Holding Out Help.
Okay.
But their specific, that's the word, like, I guess their mission is to help people who grew up in polygamist communities in southern Utah primarily, who like leave their family, basically run away from home, to like help them get like education and kind of like get a job and stuff, because a lot of them didn't go to school and don't know how to work a job other than maybe farming. So like when they run away, oftentimes to Salt Lake City, they don't really know what to do. So Holding Out Help is like an organization that helps like people find a way to live outside of what they're used to, what they grew up in.
No, that sounds really cool. It's definitely specific to your area with those kind of problems. But no, that sounds really important.
Yeah.
So
it's very niche, but it's something that just being in Utah, like, it's just like I meet people who literally were born of a mother who was one of 7 wives, and like that's just a thing you sometimes encounter here.
Yeah, it's a reality of the area.
Yeah, so it's just I know like maybe there's, I don't know, I know when it comes to like sexual freedom and stuff, like there may be a lot of people who see this that are like, you know, polygamy's not a big problem. but like practically here, like it's a form of oppression. Generally, men just abusing women and the kids. So a lot of kids do try to escape, and they need someone to help them figure out what's next for them, what they can do, you know, job wise and stuff, because they just don't know
Yeah.
what to do.
Well, cool. I'm gonna put that in the description. I also have links below to private charities that help out your fellow human beings. But Kyle, thank you once again, and thank everybody for listening.